First things first, I'ma say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up and tired of the way that things have been.
How are you?
I'm good.
We've had quite an epic week, or like well, really months, but culminating in quite a success. So with Dana Rivers, how do you feel?
About the Dana Rivers verdict?
Yeah.
Good about the verdict. Strange about the proceedings, which
Okay.
I wrote about in one of my Substacks. I have a public Substack that anyone can read, share, etc. I went to the closing arguments in the Rivers trial in Oakland, California, and I was invited to do that by a woman who wanted to hear my thoughts and insights about what was going on. And I knew going in that the prosecution and the defense and the judge would all be referring to Rivers as Ms. Rivers and as she and her. So I was prepared for that. But I also would say that it's incredibly jarring to sit there and look at someone who you know is a man
Mm-hmm.
and listen to people refer to him using she and her pronouns. It's just a strange experience. And it was made all the more strange by the fact that I knew by that point that the members of the jury were aware that Rivers is male, because that fact came through in the DNA evidence. So I don't know anything about any of these members of the jury, but I do know that they know that he's male, and they sat through an entire trial of the prosecution and the defense referring to Rivers as she and her. And I worry about what that might have done to their brains. Happily, the evidence, the physical evidence and the testimonial evidence of what happened on the night in question was so overwhelming that the jury came back with guilty verdicts on murder in the first degree with respect to all three victims, Patricia Wright, Charlotte Reed, and Benny Wright, as well as arson. So the evidence was just overwhelming. And as I listened to the closing argument and I thought about the evidence that had been presented, I had to wonder about why the prosecution was so intent on proving motive. Because in a criminal trial, the prosecution is not required to prove motive, and the jury is not required to find anything regarding motive in order to convict. But the prosecution in this case seemed intent on proving that Rivers killed Charlotte Reed out of a vendetta having something to do with the motorcycle club, and that the motorcycle club was mimicking the Hells Angels. And as part of the motorcycle club's mimicking of the Hells Angels, the motorcycle club could not permit anyone to leave the club, and Charlotte had left the club. And so the prosecution's theory as to motive was that Rivers, as the so-called enforcer of the motorcycle club, which was called the Deviants, had to kill Charlotte for the crime of leaving the club, and had to kill Patricia and Benny because they would otherwise have been eyewitnesses to the murder. But all of that was very strange for anyone who has followed the story of Rivers and knows that Rivers was active in the effort to get a women-only music festival called the Michigan Women's Music Festival, or MitchFest, shut down. None of that was even mentioned in the trial. So it was very strange.
Does it sort of, I guess, cloud the victory, knowing that this man is now going to be housed in a women's prison after murdering two women and their child?
We don't know for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the next phase of the proceedings will begin on December 5th. The jury has been instructed to reappear on December 5th. And the purpose of the next phase of the proceedings is to consider Rivers' insanity claim. Rivers is now claiming, having already been convicted, Rivers is now claiming to have been insane at the time of the murders. And so the jury will now be required to consider that claim. If Rivers is successful in the insanity claim, then he will be housed in a psychiatric facility. If he loses on his claim of insanity, then he will be sent to prison, at which point he can then apply under California SB 132 to be housed in the women's prison. But we don't know yet
Okay.
we don't know yet what will happen with that. I think it's safe to assume that if the insanity plea fails and if he's brought to a prison, he will apply to be housed in the women's prison. But we can't speculate as to whether that application will be granted.
All right. So is it two application processes? Because I believe that he was in holding at a women's facility, right? Or did am I incorrect in that?
For the past 6 years, he has been held at the Santa Rita jail, which is a mixed sex jail. And he's been held pre-trial. He's no longer pre-trial. He has been convicted.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, he's still being held in the Santa Rita jail. I don't know whether there's a separate women's wing of that jail.
Okay.
Whether he's being housed in it. I do know that the jail classifies him as being female.
Okay. Wow. We really live in the upside down right now. I wanted to ask you about, I kind of would love to hear a trajectory for anyone listening about what the ACLU has done over the years to facilitate the elimination of safeguards for women's prisons, particularly, in New York, Washington, New Jersey, and California, but really nationwide as well, because I feel like almost nobody's aware of that. And I actually, in my journey to peaking, someone tried to smear you by posting one of your interviews with Tucker Carlson, and I listened and I became interested in your work, and started, had that kind of South Park moment where I was like, what are the TERFs, the evil TERFs saying? Oh, now I'm one of them. And I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
So thank you for that, Caitlin. I worked at the ACLU from 2012 until 2014. And in that capacity, I was working as senior counsel at the ACLU Center for Justice. And the main things that we were doing were fighting mass incarceration in the United States. And we had a specific project of fighting the militarization of American policing. And I oversaw the investigation into the militarization of American policing. And I wrote the final report of the ACLU, which came out in June of 2014, which is called War Comes Home, the Excessive Militarization of American Policing. And I was very committed to those things, and I still am. I haven't lost any of my commitment to ending mass incarceration and ending police militarization. Also at the time, the National Prison Project at the ACLU was actively engaged in a fight to end the barbaric practice of shackling pregnant women in prison. So this happens across the United States. Women who are pregnant are being shackled during labor and forced to be shackled and held down while they give birth in prisons and jails. And when I was there, the ACLU was very active in fighting against that. And I was very proud of that work too. This is all very important work to protect the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. I left at the end of 2014 for personal reasons, having nothing to do with sex or gender. And since that time, the ACLU seems to have gone on a trajectory of abandoning all of its principles, all of its commitment to free speech, all of its commitment to women and girls, all of its commitment to many of the causes that the left champions. And instead, the ACLU has gone all in to so-called gender identity and trans rights. And the ACLU persistently refuses to acknowledge that this is a confrontation with the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls on the basis of sex.
Now, they had an agreement that's really facilitated some sadistic and violent men to be housed in New Jersey, especially just recently, a man and his accomplice who created pornography raping his 7-year-old daughter.
You're absolutely right that the ACLU represented someone who had a lawsuit pending before federal courts in the state of New Jersey, and they came to a settlement. And what ended up happening is that the New Jersey Department of Corrections agreed to house trans women, by which we mean men, in the women's facility, the Edna Mahan facility in the state of New Jersey. And we know that the people that we're talking about are men. And the reason that we know that they're men is that these men are impregnating women. There's no category of women who are capable of impregnating other women. And so the ACLU facilitated this. To my infinite dismay, one of the lawyers on the case is a guy named Alex Shalom, who is very active in the ACLU of New Jersey. And I used to consider him a friend. And his name is on the legal papers that grant the rights of men to be housed with women in the women's prison in New Jersey. I don't know exactly what the ACLU is doing beyond that nationally to allow men to be housed in women's prisons, other than the fact that the ACLU is very active in California and in Washington state in opposing the efforts of feminists to stand up for the rights, privacy, and safety of women prisoners. There's a case in California called Chandler versus California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation that was filed by Women's Liberation Front. The ACLU is actively opposing that. In the state of Washington, I know there's pending litigation to allow people, anyone, to get information about the men who are being housed in women's prisons, and the ACLU is actively opposing that. So the ACLU now is against the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. It's also apparently against the ability of private individuals to obtain information from our governments to which we're entitled.
Specifically in Washington, right?
Yeah.
Especially, it's generally almost, it's like they have exceptional rights in terms of especially sexual offenders, because sexual offenders is supposed to be one of the most public records available for anyone. And now the ACLU is working to conceal those records.
It's absolutely bizarre to me.
Yeah.
The ACLU oppose the efforts of ordinary citizens to obtain information to which we ought to be entitled under state Freedom of Information Acts.
And they're also working very hard to allow males and female sports. So much so I listened to Mother of Swimmer, which was a groundbreaking podcast. I think anyone should listen to that episode. But you work with Women's Declaration in the United States, right? Can you talk a little bit about your work with them and what you're doing with them to fight all of this insanity?
Sure. So I'm the current president of the U.S. chapter of Women's Declaration International, WDI. Women's Declaration International is a global organization dedicated to protecting the sex-based rights of women and girls, and we work to promote the Declaration on women's sex-based rights throughout law, globally, at all levels of government, local, state, and federal. And in the states, we're very focused on promoting the Declaration on women's sex-based rights at local, state, and federal levels throughout the country, because we think it's really important that women and girls get to be protected on the basis of sex. We are female, women and girls are female, and you're absolutely right that the ACLU is engaged in a concerted effort to destroy women's sports. There's a case going on right now before the Ninth Circuit called Hecox versus Little, which concerns an Idaho state law that protects women's sports in Idaho. And the ACLU challenged that law because the ACLU thinks that men ought to be able to compete in women's sports. And the US chapter of Women's Declaration International has filed a friend of the court brief in that case, arguing that the state law should stand, that the state law protecting sports for women and girls should stand. And we stand by that. We're not wavering from that at all.
Well, thank you for doing that. I'm sure women and men, I mean, everyone across, it's bizarre to me that the Biden administration particularly is pushing this so hard. I'm sure that more will come out with following the money and great investigative journalism work like Jennifer Bielek, but this is not supported by the majority of Americans. And honestly, if had it not been for Roe, likely, and the Roe repeal, there would have been a significant backlash, and had they not funded MAGA campaigns. But I personally was disappointed to see the avoidance of a red wave, because this would have been the time for it, because there would have been a stopgap with, the Democrats still having executive, where there would have been a chance for the Dems to maybe reconsider their positioning on some of this stuff without a huge right backlash. And I guess I'm curious to see where you see the fight going, and what you see potentially happening in 24, and how to move forward with this now that the Democrats have no reason to think that their voters don't support sterilizing, mutilating kids, or for males and females sport and all that.
Yeah, so I need to be very clear here. WDI USA is a nonpartisan organization. We welcome any woman who is interested in signing the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. We are explicitly nonpartisan, and we mean it. And we're happy to work with women across the political spectrum to fight for the sex-based rights of women and girls. Speaking solely for myself, I'm a Democrat. I registered as a Democrat when I turned 18. The only time I have not been a Democrat was a short period of time in 2007 when I was registered as a Green Party member. And then I re-registered as a Democrat in 2008 in order to vote in the 2008 Democratic primary. I consider myself a lifelong member of the left. I consider myself left-wing. I have not abandoned any of my left-wing values, and I have no intention of doing that. Whether I remain a member of the Democratic Party is a different question.
I mean, I'm not a member. I don't know who's seen my two speeches I gave publicly. I wrote you in, and I try to encourage other women to do the same. Anyway, continue.
I know you did, and I'm so grateful for that. And I know two residents of the District of Columbia who also wrote me in. So that's very nice. But I would have said before June of 2022, I would have said and did say that there's going to be a red wave. And I fully thought that the Republicans were going to take both houses of Congress. And then, as you say, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And I think that made a difference nationally. And I think that's why the Republicans did not do as well as they could have expected. I am horrified that the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, because I stand fully in support of women's right to terminate a pregnancy whenever she wants to. So I am very angry that the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade on principle. Politically and electorally, I think the Republicans would have done much better in the midterms had the Supreme Court not done that. But they did. And in 2024, we'll see what happens. The crazy orange man. Not
Sorry, I just spit. Yeah, go ahead.
Not doing the Republicans any favors.
No.
I published a piece when my book came out. My book, for anyone who doesn't know, is called The Abolition of Sex: How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. The paperback is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's also available on audiobook on Audible. shortly after that was published, I got a piece published in the Federalist. Sorry, that was laundry. I'm not a conservative, but the Federalist will publish me, and I'm grateful to them for doing that. And the piece that I got published in the Federalist in November 2021 talks about how Democrats, rank and file Democrats, are furious with party leadership about what the party is doing on gender identity. And in that piece, I said, in 2024, if the Republicans manage to put up any vaguely decent human being and grab them by the P word is not included in that category, a lot of Democrats will vote Republican in 2020.
I mean, I will. I'm watching DeSantis, to be honest, after seeing in 2018, he won by half a point. In 2020, Trump won by 3 points, and he just won by 20 points. And the 15-week, and he has been mum about going past the 15-week restriction with respect to a mother's health, which I feel like if he says he's not pushing for a national ban, doesn't come out hard swinging and pro anti-choice like Abbott has. I mean, Abbott scares me too. There's a very strong chance I will be voting Republican for the first time in my life, because I cannot. What is happening to incarcerated women chills me to the bone. They're being tormented. They're being absolutely tormented, and I just and my concern about the medicalization of kids. I don't know that I can. Anyway, so you mentioned being published in the Federalist. And I've mentioned the Tucker Carlson. How does it feel as a feminist who's been on the left her whole life, who has worked for the ACLU when they were doing what they were supposed to do and protecting the rights of American citizens and their civil liberties? How does it feel to be smeared as someone on the right and in cahoots with the right, who's working for the patriarchy when you fought your entire life against the patriarchy?
Yeah, it feels awful. And the first time I went on Tucker Carlson was early 2017. I will tell you, I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But one of my mentors and heroes in the fight for women's liberation is Leah Keith of Women's Liberation Front. And she was like, Kara, you have to do this. And I did it because she told me to. And I'm glad I did. And, I'm not mad at Tucker Carlson for platforming feminists. I'm not mad at the Federalist for platforming feminists. Who I'm mad at is the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, etc. They will not give us a platform. They will not platform the leftist feminist critique of gender identity. Those are the people that I'm mad at. So there are lots of people all over the world who are mad at me for using conservative media. And I get it. I understand the argument, but our argument's getting out there. And I'm grateful to the platforms that will give us a space to talk, give us a chance to present our leftist feminist critique of gender identity. So at this point, it's been many years and I've been getting a lot of flack for a long time, and that's fine.
Absolutely.
I can continue to take it.
So this has become a rather frightening global phenomenon. And it's not just about the attack on women's rights or the predation on kids, but it's also the attack on the freedom of speech, as you mentioned, with New York Times and any kind of MSM not platforming any dissent. I've been very concerned about the global kind of stranglehold that this ideology has on Western liberal society. And I wanted to just hear your take on that particularly, because it makes me and personally almost fear the left more. And normally that would be something I never would consider myself uttering. But I guess, why do you think that happened so quickly as it has? Is it financially driven mostly, or what's your take on that?
It's definitely financially driven. And as you mentioned, Jennifer Billick and her blog, 11th Hour blog, goes into this in depth. I do just want to say, though, it's not the left. It's people who posture as the left.
Right.
This monstrosity is authoritarian, misogynist, homophobic,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not left.
No,
And
you're
so
right.
it's very important to maintain our values. Those of us who think of ourselves as being on the left, I'm not ceding any ground to these authoritarian, misogynist homophobes. None. Even though they champion themselves as being progressive, they're lying. They're authoritarians. They're anti-free speech. They're anti-woman. They're anti-lesbian and gay. And I don't want them to get away with calling themselves the left or progressive, because they're not. They're lying. Those of us who are authentically on the political left need to hold the line.
Absolutely. Amen. Actually, thank you for that nuance and correction, because I often say that even in my posts, like, I'm still liberal, but the current state of those who call themselves liberal are not. They're just not. They're
not. They're not. You're right. And I just will also say, you know, the chips will fall as they may, but the conservative Christian right is having a lot of success by painting all of this absurdity as the progressive left or the progressive radical left.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing this very effectively, and they're winning electorally, not as well as they would have liked in the midterms because of Roe and Dobbs. We know that. But by painting gender identity as a radical left ideology, the conservatives are winning at the ballot box. And I don't want them to get away with that either. There are actually a lot of competing interests within what I would call broadly the movement to end gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
If the movement is to end gender identity, there are a lot of competing interests in that movement. And some of them include parents who are trying to save their children. They include conservatives who hate feminists.
Yes.
And don't conceal their hatred of feminists. It includes feminists. So what I would say is I want everyone to be very honest about their agenda. I have heard some parents who have so-called trans-identified children say that they're in it for the long haul. They want to beat this ideology out of society. I have heard other parents of trans-identified children say that as soon as they save their children, they're out. I respect both views. I don't like both views, but I respect them. I have worked with a lot of conservative individuals and organizations, especially conservative women's organizations, excuse me, who credit feminists where credit is due. And I appreciate them. And I will continue to do that. And I will continue to be blasphemed and criticized for working with conservatives. I know that. There are conservatives in the movement to eradicate gender identity who do not platform feminists because it does not serve their agenda, who will not ever credit feminists for the work that we have done because it doesn't serve their agenda.
What is Matt Walsh? Or who is Matt Walsh? Absolutely. What would be, so I personally, I sat in fear for years and then finally started speaking out last year. And then I discovered, really got into TERF Twitter. And if you had told me last year at this time that I'd see women across the country meeting and standing up and speaking out, I don't know that I'd believe you. So I'm so proud of that. And I guess I want to know what you would say to a woman that might be too afraid, or any American. I don't exclude any American in this, who might be too afraid right now to speak out because of the severe backlash, because of the potential job loss or smears or all that, what you would say to encourage them that now is the time.
Now is the time. And I don't want to judge anyone. But of course I want everyone to speak out, but I also understand I'm operating from a position, and I know this is like going to sound all virtue signal-y, but I truly am operating from a position of privilege. And what I mean by that specifically, I'm going to get specific. I'm not talking about privilege in a virtue signaling sense. I literally mean I do not have a mortgage. I don't have a car payment. I don't have student loans. I don't have children, and I don't have a spouse who's dependent on me. All of that means that I have been willing to take, I'm willing to take it for the team, right? Like I am going full out. I'm full on, like I'm doing this. And the consequences to me have been fairly minimal. I have no job to lose because I've already lost it. I've lost a 20-year career in criminal justice. It's gone. My career's gone. 20 years of my career gone. I've lost it. I can accept that. But I don't have much else to lose except my health and my safety and my life. And if they want to kill me, they can kill me. I will die on this hill if I have to. I don't want to, but if that's what's necessary, I will do it. Other people have things that they cannot sacrifice, like jobs and careers and children. And I understand that. And I don't want people to sacrifice their jobs and careers and children. But I do also think that we are at a turning point politically in this country. And I want everyone listening to know that I hear every day from people across the political spectrum that they have had it. They are done with this trans nonsense, gender identity nonsense. No one wants to have anything to do with it. Everyone wants to fight back against it. And so if you can, please speak out. If you're a parent, go to your school board, talk to them, please do it. I really don't think you risk too much if you have a private meeting with your school board. I really don't. They don't have to be public meetings. Just talk to people in private. And everyone across the political spectrum, contact your local, state, and federal representatives and have meetings. You don't have to be public about it. You can have private meetings. They have to talk to you. They work for you. Your tax dollars pay their salaries. Make them listen to you.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. I feel so privileged. Honestly, this has by far been the most nervous I've been because I'm such a massive fan of yours. I've been following your work for so long. I think Americans are so lucky to have a lioness like you. You're our JKR. You've sacrificed so much. You're willing to sacrifice so much, and you are a fierce feminist. I'm just so grateful that you are fighting this fight for us, or with us and for us, as who I consider the American leader of this fight. So thank you so much.
That's so nice, Caitlin. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you.